Thanks for doing this.
Oh, yep.
Here we are just a few days before the election.
Yeah.
As far as where you sit, what's the state of the race?
We feel good, but anyone who's ever run a competitive campaign knows you sprint to the finish line. There's no such thing as a 90-yard dash. You run the 100-yard dash, you go all the way through. And that's why we're here today. Obviously Marysville, going to Bellingham next, going to Everett next before I get to my daughter's softball games. So it's a full day, but all the days have been full. We're taking nothing for granted.
Everybody's seen the polling. Everybody knows what the primary numbers were. You did a couple of debates. You've kind of limited yourself in terms of interviews in October. Is that because you think you have this thing sewed up?
I don't know. We've had plenty of interviews. We do newspaper editorials, by the way. Virtually every newspaper in the state's endorsed our campaign. So we do interviews frequently all around the state. So no, the reason I think is because our message is getting out there, right? The message of having a governor who will defend our core freedoms, but be a change agent for the state. So that's been important. Only candidate beat all 39 counties, so we're taking our message directly to the people. And I think that's why we're seeing positive poll results, positive primary, but again, taking nothing for granted.
How'd you feel about that Seattle Times endorsement?
It felt good. I mean, any endorsement feels good, right? Any endorsement feels good. So we don't, I've never been someone who's put a ton in any one endorsement, right? But I think cumulatively, the fact that essentially every newspaper endorsed our campaign, every newspaper that invited me for an interview, endorsed me in the campaign. And that includes, for example, the Tri-City Herald, right? It's a part of the state that's pretty Republican, as you know. The Tri-City Herald literally said it's an easy choice for governor. So we think that's part of our message that's gotten out there, and getting around to all corners of the state, I think, has been core to who I've been as Attorney General and core to my campaign as governor as well.
The reason why I asked about that one in particular, yes, they endorsed you, but they also brought up the two Bobs issue, the donor list issue, called you at times, this is their words, petty, pushy, and overly ambitious. Yeah. How do you react to that? Because that's, the word petty is one that's been used for Donald Trump as well, the idea that you have to kiss the ring or you're kicked off a list.
I don't worry about, if you're in politics, it's a contact sport, and I'm glad the Seattle Times endorsed me. I'm glad they made it clear that on issues like reproductive freedom, that Dave Reichert would seek to unravel reproductive freedoms in Washington state. I would defend them. They made it clear. He says one thing when he's speaking to his Republican supporters behind closed doors and something else entirely when he's speaking to folks like you and members of the media. So, we're proud to have the endorsement of the Seattle Times and newspapers across the state.
You know this, that just yesterday, when we're recording this, it was just yesterday, Jay Inslee called up the National Guard in preparation of election week, or put them on standby, I should say, in preparation of election week. Do you think that's a good use of the National Guard? Can you see using the National Guard if elected for something similar?
Honestly, I haven't even had a chance to take a look at that newspaper article. I just saw the headline, so I've not taken a look at it. And what I will say is, look, we saw what happened in Vancouver, Washington, right, with literally ballots being destroyed. So look, I'm supportive of any steps we can take to make sure that votes are being counted, that folks have the opportunity to vote. And that's something we take pretty seriously, is preserving that democracy. So, I support any steps that do that in a responsible way.
As far as using the National Guard, I know it was suggested very early on in the campaign for freeway encampments to take care of graffiti, to help attack the fentanyl crisis in this state. Is that what the National Guard should be used for?
I think you have to take a look at each situation case by case, right? If you've got serious situations where you've got health issues, where you've got public safety issues, where you have humanitarian issues, right? I think as a governor, you got to make sure you're using whatever resources you have that are appropriate for each situation. Each situation is going to be a little bit different, right? This election might be a little different than elections 40 years ago in terms of that national mood, potential threats that we have. Everything from the Republican candidate for president, Donald Trump, who, by the way, Dave Reichert says he loves Donald Trump's policies. Dave Reichert, by the way, at a rally recently said, "Make America great again," to great applause. But when he's talking to folks like you, as you know, he says, no, I'm not a Trump guy. So, but the governor's got to make sure that he or she's using that power in a way that's responsible.
On juvenile justice, you know this, that there's been a lot of issues as of late in the state, Pierce County, King County. It's been, there's a bigger picture story here about what happened during the pandemic and youth education and development, but crimes have gone up amongst teens. 15-year-old in Falls City just recently, as you know, that story. Do you believe, if elected, any sort of youth facility, any sort of youth jail should be closed in Washington State, given what is going on right now?
When I was on the King County Council, I supported the new youth detention facility that we actually have. I was one of the key sponsors of that legislation, making sure that moved forward, for the very reason that if somebody commits serious crimes, regardless of their age, there need to be consequences for that. Now, obviously, when it comes to young people, right, hey, certain crimes we understand now, hey, the development of the brain, that type of thing. But for serious crimes, there's got to be a place for folks to go, regardless of their age. So I think my record's pretty clear on that.
A lot of people talking about education, and this is the flip side of that youth jail issue and juvenile justice issue is how do you fix this in the state? Mm-hmm. You know, your opponent has supported the discussion about charter schools. You know, the situation in Seattle. I believe you have talked about making the OSPI director a cabinet position as opposed to an elected official. So how do you fix it if elected come day one of 2025?
So a couple things. Number one is the percentage of our budget, right? The K through 12 budget that the state has. That percentage that we budget as a state for K through 12 education has actually gone down in recent years, as you know. I think that needs to go the opposite direction. We should have an increase, in part because the demands with special education, mental health issues in the classroom, you name it, those demands have gone up. So number one, the budget should reflect a greater prioritization of K through 12 education. And I say that as the son of a longtime special education public school teacher in our state. Number two, we want to avoid bad ideas. Dave Reichert supports a voucher program, right? A voucher program, which by the way, would take public dollars and be invested into private schools that are unaccountable. That's a bad idea. And I think that is one that is hurting his campaign very badly at this stage. So my view is make sure we have the right budget priorities as a state to invest in K through 12 education and make sure we're moving forward.
As a Seattle guy, King County guy, you know this with the school district in Seattle, what they're going through, talking about closures and perhaps phased in closures. If Dave Reichert's plan goes through with charter schools or voucher programs, what do you think that does to the state's largest public school district?
Makes the situation much worse, right? Financially, everything shows, study after study, states have done that show, that's a drain on resources for public schools. That's why I'm opposed to what Dave Reichert is saying. And I think that's a big issue in this campaign.
A couple other things. Retail theft. You formed a task force in the AG's office in 2022, but I hear this from the business community. It's worse than ever. Nordstrom, as you know, called King County the worst for organized retail theft that's happening during your time in office, during the time that you have formed this task force. How do you fix that? How do you turn that situation around?
I think that's what we're working on. We're prosecuting those cases. So as you know, it's not just a task force. We created a task force working with law enforcement, working with business leaders, working with workers, right, in these stores to address a real serious issue that we're facing. As a result of that work and coordinating those efforts, we went to the state legislature to ask for more resources to prosecute those crimes. That's the one thing we heard over and over from businesses, from law enforcement. We need more resources. And as you know, we can't prosecute one of those cases. My office doesn't have that jurisdiction unless, and this is important, a local prosecutor asks me to take the case. So what we've done, working with law enforcement, is get the resources from the legislature, create a team in my office of investigators and prosecutors. So now we're charging those cases, routinely charging those cases. Now we're getting convictions. People are going away to prison for years as a result of these serious offenses. And I'm confident that my successor will continue that work and we'll see results from that. When people realize there are serious consequences, that there's an entire unit in the Office of Attorney General devoted to these cases, that's going to make a difference.
I know that some will also suggest it's because there's not enough cops on the street. I know you put out a public safety plan talking about $100 million, but how quickly can that actually do anything to change the direction of even the Seattle Police Department and hiring additional police officers? Because they've put out a bunch of bonuses and the city's offering bonuses, and it's still not changing the trajectory of that department.
It'll make a difference. I've talked to law enforcement officers in communities large and small where they say we would welcome that. Particularly smaller communities often say we hire someone and after a couple of years they go to a larger, right? They go to a larger city and we lose them. We've trained them up and they're gone. More resources would help us keep that person providing law enforcement in their community. So look, there's no one solution to complex issues. whatever that issue is. It's not that simple. But that investment for the state, by the state, to help local jurisdictions who do that hiring will undoubtedly help in attracting and retaining law enforcement officers, and that's going to be an important first step.
Okay, couple more. 2117. The public sentiment, it seems, from polling has shifted. There's been a lot of money put into that race. It very well could be rejected by voters. The no vote could win on 2117. But there obviously are still people that are concerned about gas prices.
Yeah.
People are concerned about climate change. You have said on the campaign trail, if that initiative is rejected, that you could still see tweaking the whole cap and trade program. So how do you tweak that if that in fact does go down?
Well, first thing is to preserve it, right? Just to be clear, that's going to be super important. Dave Reichert, my opponent, wants to repeal the Climate Commitment Act. That would have profound consequences for jobs, for climate, for our environment all around the state. So that's an important distinction right there. Number two, the key is to work with legislators and make sure we're doing what we can with the way the Climate Commitment Act is run to make sure we're making things affordable for Washingtonians. So what you'll see from me as governor is, hey, moving forward on issues like climate, but making sure we're being common sense about it, that we're being practical about it, and making sure we're not having too much of a burden on Washingtonians. There's another initiative that's an important one, right, which is the capital gains tax. We talked earlier about education. Part of that capital gains tax funds early learning. Dave Reichert wants to repeal that. He has no plan for what he would do to backfill the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, what he would do for kids. I support the capital gains tax. It's paid for by a few thousand Washingtonians, but the hundreds of millions of dollars make a huge difference in our state. So I'm a no vote on those two initiatives, and there's a big contrast with my opponent on each of them.
So, but you still pledge to tweak that if...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hey, farmers need to make sure they're getting that exemption as an example, right? That's a part of a commitment that was made. We need to make sure that's happening as an example, yes.
On ferries, you've also put this front and center on your website that this is one of your top issues to fix the ferry system. I think there's still some concern with people, though, that, hey, we're not talking about new ferries until 2028. That would be 3 years through your term.
Yeah.
How the heck do you fix it before 2028? Because patience is wearing thin, especially people on the west side of the Sound. So what do you do day one to try and get more ferries in the water?
Yeah, I only wait till day one. So I've made a pledge during my transition that I'll be visiting with island communities, meeting with businesses, with individuals, talk about hear from them directly what more the state can do. One thing to keep in mind, you raised an important point. Folks on these communities understand that we're not going to solve this problem overnight. It's complex. We need more boats. Boats take time to construct. But they find it maddening, for example, when there is a boat there ready to go, but there's not the staff to support that boat to move, right? Those are problems we can address in the shorter term, right? Part of this is salaries, right? To attract folks, make it easier on the training. There are steps we can take as a state to make sure the workforce is in place. So when we do have boats, they're running, right? So there are multiple things to this that need to be addressed. Number two, accountability. So when we're having this conversation in 4 years, if all goes well for me in this election, you'll be asking me about ferries, right? I need to make sure I'm accountable to you. I need to make sure I'm accountable to the folks watching this interview. And so I pledge to take the head of ferries and make that person a cabinet level position. So they're sitting in meetings with me every single week, and I'm looking them in the eye saying, hey, how are we doing on getting more boats in the water? How are we doing on staffing up, making sure we're getting on-time runs more frequently? So that's accountability to make sure as governor, I understand how big a crisis this is, and that someone's reporting directly to me. It's not going through a whole bunch of layers of staff. I'm hearing directly from the person in charge.
Okay, last one.
Yeah.
You have said on the campaign trail, you're your own guy. When you were at King County, you took on a Democrat. You described yourself as a maverick back then 20 years ago. You're talking about being your own guy heading in this campaign, that you're not Jay Inslee. So what's one thing that you would do different than Jay Inslee has done in his 12 years in office?
Oh, I mean, look, we're two very different people, you know. So I appreciate you mentioning I just was chatting with this group. First time I ran for office was against a 20-year incumbent Democrat, chair of the county council. That is not the easy way into politics, as you well know, okay? I had no institutional support. The party didn't support me. It was a grassroots campaign. But I learned a really important lesson, right? You can run your own campaign and be your own person and come out the other side of that politically. And look, I deeply respect Governor Inslee. I'm honored to have his endorsement. He has served the state well for 12 years. But look, we're two very different people. And I think anyone who looks at my time in public service, whether they agree or not, like the Seattle Times editorial board, the endorsement said, here are some things we disagree with them on, here are some things we like about them. That's normal in politics. But I think what people want in their elected officials is someone who's not afraid to take on the biggest issues. You know, hey, I led on the issue of banning the sale of assault weapons in the state. Dave Reichert opposes that. I wasn't shy about that. I don't have to do that. I'm not a legislator. But I think anyone who watches my time in public service knows I'm willing to take on the status quo, willing to take on my own party if I think that's the right thing to do. And if I get elected governor, and I think I will, they can expect that when I'm their governor.
Good.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Appreciate it. Yep, you
We
bet.
covered a lot of ground.
That's the way we do it.